a typed letter from a Stephanie L., a typed letter from Philip Paulson, a email from Lana Albert, 2 pages in length, and a 2-page email from a Danielle Parsons.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Judge, I would like to call Sarah Boone.
You may proceed.
If you could take this.
Yes, please. Ms. Boone, you can be seated. You've been previously sworn. You may inquire, sir.
For the record, just state your name again.
Sarah Boone.
All right. Now, this is unlike a trial, so you're allowed to speak in a narrative form, as well as I understand you have taken some notes or written a letter that you want to read from, and then you want to speak to the court after that.
Yes.
All right. Why don't you go ahead and get started?
This is actually an edited version of.
Hold on a second.
I had a lot to say. I've had a lot of time to think about things, and I didn't really know how to put it on paper, and I didn't know how much I could say or how little I should say. So what I have here is, like I said, an edited version. But I would like to read the more important parts that I feel that everyone should know that wasn't said in my actual trial. And on top of what I have on paper, I have, this is just the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. So I wanted to read this, and then if I may, I would like to address everyone in my apology on top of my statement.
You may proceed, ma'am.
Kintu sukuroi is a kind of Japanese ceramic style which means to repair with gold. In this tradition, when a ceramic piece breaks, an artisan will fuse the pieces back together again using liquid gold or gold dust lacquer. So rather than being covered up, the breaks become more obvious and a brilliant new piece of art emerges from the brokenness. It embraces flaws, weakness, and imperfections, and also teaches the essence of resilience. Every crack in a ceramic piece is a part of its history, and each piece becomes more beautiful because it has been broken. This is the wisdom of Kintu sukuroi. In my wisdom and with all of my repairs, then, now, and ongoing, God is, has been, and will always be my artisan. All of my gold is forgiveness. This has held me together, made me shine brighter, and overcome the damage caused by Jorge Torres, the Torres family, the justice system, Orange County Corrections Department, social media, scoundrel detectives, infamy, defamation, ongoing constitutional rights violations, second-degree murder, forced into being pro se. Just as gold is very precious, forgiveness is invaluable. Forgiveness is not an attempt to change or forget who, what, or how you've lived through to be so gold, but an act of grace, humility, and considerable self-compassion to be set free from sorrow. Withholding forgiveness denies your brilliance and adds even greater grief and deeper heartache, irreparable cracks on top of the already that no one deserves, no matter the pain or disappointment, untruths or injustice. It doesn't matter, as the more broken you are, even though now different than before, you've become more outstanding and more extraordinary. Above all, when you let go of blame, misunderstandings, excuses, give up your anger and cease from resentment, this is forgiven. And when you forgive, you heal. And when you heal, you move forward. My goal begins with Jorge Torres, and every time he slapped me, kicked, punched, spit on, raped, stabbed, choked, laughed at, pushed, pulled, dragged, whipped, tripped, stole from, lied, terrorized, threatened, humiliated, forced, degraded, made me cry. Every time he tried to end me, defeat, or destroy. I forgive George for beating me senseless, for trying to sleep because I had to go to work or my son's field trip the next day, for ruining my deceased family's heirlooms, traditions, and keepsakes, my son's furniture, destroying the television we watched together, for wrecking our townhome by breaking windows, punching holes in the walls and doors, ramming his entire body into glass doors, kicking in my front and back door over and over and over, for breaking or removing the locks from all of the doors and sometimes the knobs altogether, so I had nowhere to feel safe, including the sacred space of my son's room where he beat me bloody on his bed, for terrorizing and threatening my blind and deaf dogs by leaving the gate open I built to keep them safe, telling me he hoped I'd find their bloated dead body in the pond or scrape their remains off of the pavement, for kicking them off of the bed and throwing across the room because they were trying to protect me, for threatening to make me unrecognizable to my son by breaking all of the bones in my face, like his brother Moses did to him after he kept seeing all of the bruises from George beating me, like all of the times their father beat their mother, for all of the drunken rages and fist fights with so many neighbors when wandering into their apartments during hunting expeditions after I had escaped, for drowning me in liquor and wine because I didn't want to drink, causing me to urinate on myself, then butting the end of the bottle in my face, giving me 2 black eyes and a bloody nose, for making me experience what it is to be sodomized, threatening to kill my friends and the neighbors when they checked on me to make sure I was alive and in one piece, for threatening to burn down our townhome and set my car on fire because I got a job, for holding me hostage on weekends my son was supposed to come over by keeping my keys around his neck, my phone in his crotch, and a butcher knife stuck in the middle of the table as a warning not to ask anything or try to leave, for stabbing me in the leg and not letting me call 911 for an ambulance or seek help, where I nearly bled to death until I concocted a lie to save him from being arrested, for destroying my phone with a hammer because my son called, for me experiencing ever being arrested and after today, prison, for beating me almost blind, crushing my occipital lobe, for having me experience what it means to see stars like in the cartoons where a character has a tall lump on their head. I had that too, and many times, for dragging me downstairs by my hair in the middle of the night just to sit next to him, for taking my car driving drunk with my debit card to buy more alcohol while I slept, even after I kindly explained the importance of my car to take my son to school foremost, me to work, and he to his batterers intervention classes and probation officer meetings, where I would be forced to sit for hours in the parking lot waiting for him, for causing me so much trauma and pain mentally, physically, emotionally, I had to be hospitalized more than once, for destroying my reputation and integrity, for my M for murderer scarlet letter, not letting me feel safe to live, talk to other people, spend time with my son, have a job, friendships, simply go to the bathroom with the door closed, or go to sleep soundly or comfortably. I forgive George for lying, for him trying in so many ways, so many times, to end me with his terrifying love. I also forgive the Torres family, his mother and father foremost, also his 2 ex-wives and daughters, all for knowing who George was, capable of, and has done in the past, his history of violence and where he learned it, then to keep turning a blind eye when I would ask for help. All of his siblings, including Farrell Torres, who is now on his way to prison for stabbing the mother of their baby in the side of her head. For everyone who knew what George was doing to me, sometimes how and when, but allowed and enabled. I forgive them for caring too late. I hope they all ask themselves while quiet and comfortable in bed at night the uneasy question, what could I have done to stop this from happening to both of them? And after all the times Sarah tried to, by asking for help from all of us and so many times. Another great contributor of my gold is social media, with its greed, insensitivity, deception, obvious exploitation, and advantageous gain from my criminal case as a whole, and for sentencing me by anticipation as a result of ignorance and hate, conjured and fabricated by the organized crime that is social media, which condemned me in the court of global public opinion since the beginning. My family law case is the new prey waiting to be picked apart and pillaged from me being made infamous by social media in my criminal case. It simply seems I cannot forgive and be forgiven and move forward. Social media has made me a pariah. It has caused great oppression and undeniable disadvantages, especially by broadcasting and manipulating my cases online. In my criminal case, as a result, my opportunities to be given a fair, proper, and uninfluenced, successful conclusion was heavily depleted and poisoned. I forgive them. Also, all of the media tycoons for not having a life of their own, trying so desperately to make themselves seem so right by making me appear so wrong. Forgiveness for prejudgment, ridiculous theatrics, lies, making and taking blood money from my and others' misfortunes, accidents, and catastrophes. It's all over their hands and their keyboards. And even after all that's been said and done, theorized, hypothesized, scrutinized, and blasphemed, in my case, still no one knows me. In the end, I forgive myself for not choosing my life sooner, for not being more brave, vigilant, bolder, and outspoken, stronger, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, for being hopeless, desperate, simple-minded, weak, and inexperienced. I forgive myself for not realizing I was enduring a life of domestic violence and that the vicious cycle of never ends. I had nothing to compare to. I've never been hit by a man ever before in my life. I was raised hitting a woman was wrong and should never happen. No excuse. I forgive myself for not escaping permanently, for not fighting back sooner to save myself, my son, my dogs, home, and car. Having 20/20 hindsight thinking of everything I could have done differently or better to avoid the outcome. I think about this every day since. Also, of all the good days we had together, for him at least, while I was constantly in hyperdrive, high alert, and paranoid, making sure I did everything right all the time. If not, the great possibility I would be ended as George threatened me with so many times before. I forgive myself for falling in love with a monster, and no matter how grotesque he may become, I still loved him, hoped, and forgave. I tried breaking the spell so he wouldn't be a monster anymore. I saw who he was inside. George made me then, now, and always love him for all of his cracks also. We made each other our own brilliant pieces of art from the cracks and repairs. Unfortunately, not all cracks can be. In all of my forgiveness, George is my greatest lesson and will forever be a part of me. I think of him every day and still speak to him when alone on the rec yard. I ask his forgiveness and that he looks for me at the gates of heaven so I can tell him how sorry I am, endlessly, and that I never stopped loving him. In all of it and still. When I first came to jail, I put my mat under my bed and cried all day and all night for months, only falling asleep from being so exhausted with grief. I wrote him letters. I wrote his family and his daughters, apologizing for asking for their forgiveness. But due to fear that my life or sons would be jeopardized, I did not send. I am sorry. I cannot begin to fathom any of their grief and sadness. Please forgive me. Almost everything reminds me of him, seeing my stab wound every day especially. It truly reminds me that all I really did live through. George haunts me. He is everywhere. I believe because I do still love him, think of him, and miss his laugh the most. In my heart, I know he is with me and understands that this tragedy was not intentional. I hope everyone can, his family foremost. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please wholeheartedly know that, and always, I would never. Forgive me, George. Forgive me, Torres family. Forgive me, Judge Cranick. To the entire planet, please forgive me. I graciously and humbly ask for consideration, for forgiveness to be extended instead of judgment, for reconciliation and restoration for all of us to move forward. My apology is profuse and ceaseless. Allow me, please, to brush off the muck, wipe the blood off of my face, and fix the cuts in my skin. I ask for understanding in what really happened and for how long, for second chances, repentance, and redemption, to advocate for all domestic violence survivors, to help them overcome, heal, and still hope, always, to make their voices heard, to confidently walk with all of their scars on the outside and the inside, to help them not ever become a casualty of domestic violence as so many others, to stop the abuse and maltreatment before it's too late. There is always hope, and you can survive. In my soft-spoken conclusion, I ask this: would I be the darling mother, celebrated woman of the year, if it were I who died? How many daughters, mothers, sisters, aunts, grandmothers, nieces, and friends have been because they did? I am a survivor. Learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke oppressors, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. Isaiah 1:17, all-encompassing, protect the abused.
Ms. Boone, is that the end of your written statement?
Yes.
Now, gathering your thoughts, did you want to make an oral statement?
I do.
All right, would you do that now?
Yes, please. My statement, my verbal statement, is primarily to the Torres family, to the judge, to his daughters. I know you all know who I really am, and that I did care for George, and that I do still love George. I know you know that we had very many good days, and I take offense to the statement of being said that this is just for a moment. Right now with me here in the courtroom in front of you all, this is just for a moment. But the moments before that, in order for me to be here, is endless. It's everlasting. The scars that I have on the inside, my outside scars have healed, except for my stab wound. But this has changed me as a person to see things differently and to understand things differently and to not be weak and just try to protect yourself, and forever, regardless of the time that I may receive from today, I forever will have this experience. I forever will have George Torres with me in my heart, in my mind, my body, and my soul. As he and I used to say that we were one soul split into two bodies. This is not just for a moment. It may be for everyone in this courtroom, but when I leave, this is forever. When you all leave, that this is forever. This is forever for everyone here and those who it matters to most. I am one of those who will experience this forever. I'm sorry. Words do not define my shame, and I don't know what else it is that I can say and convey to the Torres family how this happened. The ifs and whys and how really don't matter. It happened, and I'm sorry. Words cannot describe. And I hope that everyone can forgive me, the Torres family most of all, and his daughters, because I know what he meant to them. And I don't think that anybody ever understood what he meant to me and I to him. And I ask for forgiveness.
Ms. Boone, I have just one or two questions, if you don't mind. And you can speak on it if you want or not. But this is a unique case, and one of the reasons it's so unique is that you were in jail for 4.5 years prior to your trial. And I understand that when you were brought up as a child that you did have some spirituality in your family, some church, some religion.
Always.
But I understand that you got away from that. Did you have a chance during the 4.5 years to look back at your spirituality?
Absolutely. You know, everyone supposes that this is one of the worst experiences of my life, and it's actually been one of my greatest. If I were not beaten to death, I was going to work myself to death on the outside, and I never had time to get back into my Bible and to pray and to be with the Lord. And I, being here incarcerated, have had time, of course, to get closer to God, to reacquaint myself to Him, and realize what it's all about. This is all temporary. And when I say temporary, I don't mean by being set free in jail or from prison or wherever else. It means being set free and temporary, meaning that you work for something higher, you work for God, that you strive for your crown to be placed upon your head by Jesus Christ by being said, "You have done well, my good and faithful servant." I've always tried to be a good and faithful servant. I was just a servant as opposed to doing all that I can when my family were alive and I was going through everything up to this point. I've become so much more closer to the Lord, and it's made me such a better person, and I hope that I am an example going forward of the Lord's light and can draw many people to me because of it.
Any follow-up, State?
No, I assumed that was the final word.
Thank you. She can return back to council's table. Anything else from your side of the ledger, Mr. Owens?
No more witnesses, Judge, just arguments.
Okay. Anything else in rebuttal, or just proceed to argument, State?
Just proceed to argument.
Okay. All right. Once Ms. Booth's seated, you can proceed with your argument, either Mr. J or Mr. Cacciatore. You may proceed, sir.
Your Honor, I'm going to start my argument by what I anticipate Mr. Owens will bring up in his presentation regarding the plea offer in this case. That she was offered the resolution in this case of 15 years in the Department of Corrections to begin with. I think it's important, though, that the entire circumstance of that plea offer is put forward. And there's something very critical to that. It's not just 15 years in the Department of Corrections. It's 15 years in the Department of Corrections, but it's predicated on something. And the consideration that it's predicated on is the defendant coming to court and accepting responsibility for her actions. For her coming to court and saying, I am responsible for George Torres's death, and I accept the punishment that comes with it. That consideration was never given in this case. And because that consideration was never given in this case, the offer of 15 years in no way represents what this case is worth, or what George Torres's life is worth. That is an offer predicated on a particular circumstance, a circumstance of a first-time defendant accepting responsibility and giving every benefit of the doubt in coming to court and saying that they are ready to be punished. Those conditions were never met. So then we turn to this case, and we turn to this crime, and we turn to the actions of the defendant of taking the law into her own hands and murdering George Torres. She has never shown remorse for that. She didn't show remorse for that here today. She again painted herself as the victim. She's the victim of George Torres. She recounted the litany of evil deeds and mistreatments that he perpetrated upon her. She's the victim of George Torres' family. She's the victim of the police. She's the victim of social media. It's all about Sarah Boone. Everything's about Sarah Boone, about how she is the victim. But Sarah Boone sentenced every one of George Torres' loved ones to a life sentence. just like she sentenced George Torres when he was in that suitcase. George Torres lived out his last nightmarish circumstance in that suitcase, begging to be let out for several minutes, which undercuts any argument that this was somehow unsophisticated. There was ample time and opportunity over and over for her to do something different, but she went forward with taking the law into her own hands and ensuring that George Torres was never getting out of there, while she went up to bed and went to sleep for hours on end. She can't say that she was in duress for the same reason. She was in such duress of George Torres that she goes upstairs and goes to sleep for 11 hours. Your Honor, there's been nothing from the testimony of Dr. Harper either that establishes any type of diagnosis that would give this court a basis to downward depart. Dr. Harper has put blinders on to the fact that she has been incarcerated for 58 months. 58 months with the opportunity to receive mental health treatment, and the expert witness is absolutely incurious about what any of those records or diagnosis or anything that would have been there would have said. There is no valid basis for a downward departure in this case. She deserves a life sentence. Thank you.
Mr. Owens, response?
Just granted. First off, I want to thank you for taking the time to hear our side, hear the witnesses, and review the letters on Sarah Boone's behalf. You know, we've all been here for this trial. We've all been here for other trials. We've all got some age on us. We've all got some life experience on us. And this is a unique case. This was a unique homicide. It was a unique death. And as we all know, a lot of these cases are not black and white. They're shades of gray. And these crimes don't occur in a vacuum. That there's generally a history, especially involving a domestic couple, a history that comes into play that must be explored. And a lot of what Sarah Boone testified to here today probably happened behind closed doors. And we all know that many times we do not know what happens behind closed doors between a man and a woman in their home, unless there is some reason for the neighbors or law enforcement or somebody else to get involved. And that happened in this case. And so gradually over time, as this event occurred, there was an investigation, and it was learned that there was a history of domestic violence involving these two parties. And what we learned was that physically there was violence, and there were photographs to establish that, as were introduced in the trial. And then there was testimony from experts, not only the defense expert, Dr. Harper, that Sarah Boone was the victim, and she was a victim of intimate partner violence, but coupled with the fact that the state's expert testified on the stand at the trial that Sarah Boone was a victim of intimate partner violence, that she suffered from this domestic or this battered spouse syndrome at the hands of Jorge Torres. So there's two sides to it. And in a domestic violence situation like that, 95% of the women get out of that relationship. When violence starts to occur, they've either been raised a certain way, they have a certain self-esteem about themselves, where they refuse to put up with it, knowing that it's wrong, knowing that they can do better. But there is a small percentage throughout the country that, for whatever reason, mental health issues, addiction issues, whatever it is, it's complex. Financial reasons, children are involved, whatever. If you do any studying on it, there are circumstances where there is a group of women, predominantly women, it can happen to men, but majority of the time it's a woman that gets caught in this cycle of what we term as intimate partner violence. And court heard the testimony about the cycle that occurs. It's over a period of time and it repeats itself, and you go through these phases. And a lot of times the victim's not a great historian at trying to articulate it. She tried to do it here today. And I think on Sarah Boone's behalf, she is a unique individual. She's got the personality that she's got. I don't know, you heard from Dr. Harper that a lot of that was formulated based on the way her mother did not bond with her, the way that her father was the way that he was, the fact that she lost several relatives at a young age, and the trauma that can result. We heard from Dr. Harper that she did suffer from post-traumatic stress as it relates to that trauma in early childhood, and then again as it relates to the events that occurred between Mr. Torres and her. So it's complicated, Judge. It's complicated. But the jury has spoken. Sarah Boone was entitled under Florida law to present that defense, and she did. That testimony was allowed to be presented. She was allowed to testify. But the jury spoke. And so here we are today with you in a position to decide what is justice for Sarah Boone. And I don't know you that much other than our time together, but from what I know you try to do the right thing. And that's what we're asking the court to do. To have some discernment, to have some understanding of the unique situation that Sarah Boone found herself in. And quite frankly, Judge, this all didn't occur behind closed doors. A lot of this was in the public eye. Mr. Torres had, I believe, 3 criminal cases before the courts of this county in which Sarah Boone was a victim. Mr. Torres was the accused. Those cases were dismissed. We know from the history of this domestic violence field that that's normal, that Sarah Boone every time either tried to bond him out or tried to get the case dismissed. At some point, somebody has to stop. Somebody has to say, wait, what's going on here? This keeps repeating. It's going to get worse. Something's going to happen. The system failed, Sarah Boone. I'd ask for you to consider that. The circumstances surrounding that failure and what led us here today. I've asked the court to consider a downward departure. I believe you've gotten a copy of the score sheet.
Not since before trial.
Okay.
Is the score sheet stipulated to?
Yes, yes, sir.
All right, you may approach. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Judge, I was provided that here today, and I believe, I can't remember the total number of months that it involves, but divided by 12, I think it's 20 months. 20.6 is the low end of the guidelines or something about.
It's 246.0 months based on the score sheet.
I did the calculation, but I believe that the low end is 20 years, 20.6 years state prison, I believe is the low end.
20.5. Yes, sir.
And as the court knows, I believe it's on page 3, there are some aggravators that the court can consider in opposing the sentence, and then there are a list of mitigators that the court can consider in downward departing, meaning going lesser than the low end of the guidelines. And in the defendant's motion for downward departure, we mentioned, and I had Dr. Harper testify about 2 or 3 of the grounds, and the court needs to only find one to go below the guidelines. The capacity of the defendant to appreciate the criminal nature of her actions and to conform said actions to the requirements of the law were substantially impaired. Judge, I don't have to reiterate the facts and circumstances surrounding this event. You were here, you heard the testimony, you heard the circumstances surrounding what happened and how it happened. I would ask that you consider that as a mitigator. 2D, the defendant requires specialized treatment for a mental disorder that is not related to substance abuse or addiction and is amenable to treatment. I think it's fair to say here that we know that Sarah suffers from some mental health issues, objective mental health issues that have been opined by Dr. Harper and Dr. Werner. And you heard Dr. Harper testify about the post-traumatic stress disorder that she suffers from as it relates to this event, as it relates to her trauma that occurred in childhood. I think we heard from Dr. Werner. Dr. Werner testified that she suffered from the alcohol abuse disorder, as did Dr. Harper, but Dr. Werner also mentioned that she was not for sure about the anxiety disorder, whether it occurred prior to or because she was in the jail for the 4.5 years. However, she does require specialized treatment for the mental disorder, and she is amenable for treatment. And then third, the defendant acted under extreme duress, I think based on Sarah Boone's mindset as she testified to her today, and then you heard from the experts at the trial that when you get that anxious about what happens, Sarah testified about they would have good days where there would be no drinking or very little drinking, and then there would be other days where there was heavy drinking, and generally when Jorge Torres got highly intoxicated is when potentially things could get violent, and that she was constantly anxious about each day that she was with him. She loved him, obviously being in a cycle like that where you love someone but can't leave them. For whatever reason, Jorge Torres couldn't leave Sarah Boone, and Sarah Boone couldn't leave Jorge Torres, and it was a vicious cycle. But we believe that she qualifies under that it was under extreme duress at the time of this event. And lastly, the defense was committed in an unsophisticated manner, which was an isolated incident. Now, isolated, we know, Judge, that she had one prior event in which both of them were arrested. You heard her testimony that it was during an event. They ended up downstairs next to the washer and dryer, and that she was on the bottom, and she had used her hands to try to get him off, and she had tried to choke him, and there were some marks on him. And she was arrested for I think felony domestic violence battery, as well as he was arrested. I think a few days later, both of those charges were dismissed against either party. But she has no criminal conviction record. She has never been convicted of a crime other than that event. Now, I think that can be distinguished. So we believe that it was an unsophisticated manner. Obviously, the uniqueness of this event is unsophisticated. Anybody that would calculate that they were going to murder somebody by putting them in a suitcase and letting them spend the night and the next morning, not try to dispose of the body, not try to put the suitcase in a car and go dump the body, not try to dispose of the bat, do something. She did nothing. No attempts to tamper with evidence. No attempts after the fact to uncover any conduct whatsoever. No attempts to delete the videos from her phone. Here's my phone, voluntarily given that information. I think that goes to the unsophisticated manner of unintentional death that occurred. I remember the first time I saw the Suitcase video. And I know people have differing opinions. Tony Henderson, my colleague, had a different opinion when he saw it. But I remember the first time I saw the video, and I heard what she was saying to him. When he was saying, "Hey, Sarah, let me out. I can't breathe," or words to that effect. And the way that she was talking to him, and the statements that she gave to him, in my mind, what has he done to her? What has he done to her? Any loved one you see in a situation like that is going to run and let them out. So my thought was, obviously, they were both drinking. But what has he done to her? And I think it's telling about what she'd endured. So it's not a clear-cut case, Judge. It's not black and white. There is some gray. And it's up to you to decide what's appropriate based on the court's, based on the jury's decision. But I would ask you to temper whatever justice that you think is appropriate with some mercy. And consider the fact that the state was willing to offer 15 years on a manslaughter as a lesser included offense based on the facts and circumstances that they were aware of prior to this trial. Thank you.
Thank you. Any rebuttal by the state?
No,
Okay. The court has had the opportunity to review the evidence and testimony that was presented at trial. The victim impact statements presented here today, the statements of character witnesses, both orally and in writing, Dr. Harper's report and testimony, the defendant's testimony, pre-sentencing investigation, the arguments of the state and the arguments of the defense. Court pronounces sentence as follows. Ms. Boone, court sentences you to life in the Department of Corrections with credit time served that Madam Clerk will provide to you momentarily. There are also court costs and costs of prosecution, which Madam Clerk will give you the totals of momentarily. Due to the court levying a life sentence, the court is inclined to liquidate those to a civil judgment unless I hear opposition from the state.
no opposition, Your Honor.
All right. Madam Clerk, if you could please give us the credit time served and the court costs, please.
4 years, 9 months, and 8 days, and the court costs are $418, a state prosecution fee of $100, a dirt fee of $50, and a PD fee. Oh, excuse me, you're not supervised.
I'm right.
So the total would be, would come up to $618.
All right, ma'am, the court costs and costs of prosecution are $618. Those will be liquidated to a civil judgment. You will be given credit time served of 4 years, 9 months, and 8 days. You will have 30 days from today to appeal the judgment and sentence in writing. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided to you. I'm going to have the courtroom deputy provide you the paperwork. Because you've been incarcerated for the last 58 some odd months, the court is going to declare that you are indigent in this matter. I cannot appoint the public defender to represent you as they are conflicted out. Similarly, I cannot appoint the regional conflict counsel to represent you for the same reasons. The clerk will appoint an attorney from the conflict wheel who specializes in appellate litigation. And again, you'll have 30 days from today to appeal that judgment and sentence in writing. Do you have any questions for me? You will now be remanded into the custody of the Orange County Jail to transfer you to the Department of Corrections, and I wish you the best of luck. State, anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Defense, anything further? No, sir. All right. Thank you all very much. Court's off the record.
I'll mail it to you. I'll mail it to you.
Do you mind if it's not that one? It's not the same one.
She's on her way.
Okay. Can you go give me a heads up when they get her here?
Yeah, I got you.
I gotta go down and see her real quick. All right. Start.
They're gonna go ahead and get me a signed document before she leaves. Oh, is that it? Can I see if she? Is this it? 9 o'clock?